My name is Chloe Jenkins, and I grew up in Willow Creek, Ohio, a place where the biggest excitement usually involved the high school football team or a new flavor at the local ice cream shop. I was 20 years old, just trying to figure out my next step after high school, saving up for community college to study graphic design. Our house was a comfortable two-story place with a big front porch and a maple tree that turned brilliant red every autumn. It was where my younger sister, Lily, and I had spent our whole lives, a place that should have felt like a safe haven, a quiet corner of the world. But our little slice of suburban peace was constantly under siege, not by some grand natural disaster, but by the 70-something-year-old monster who lived next door, Mr. Henderson. He was a menace, a sour old man with a perpetually angry face and a nasty glint in his eyes that made my stomach churn every time I saw it. He was our personal storm cloud, always hovering, always threatening to rain down on our parade. From the time I was a little kid, Mr. Henderson had been a terror. He would meticulously shovel his own driveway after a snowstorm. Then, with a smirk I could practically feel through the window, he would heave giant clumps of icy snow right onto our freshly cleared sidewalk, creating a new barrier we'd have to tackle. It wasn't just snow, either. He'd occasionally decide our trees were too tall, even though they were clearly on our property, and we'd come home to find branches haphazardly lopped off, leaving ugly, jagged edges. He'd shout at my dad over the fence, screaming that our grass wasn't manicured enough, that it was an eyesore to his perfect lawn. But his nastiness wasn't just aimed at our property or my dad. It was the way he'd watch my sister Lily, who was not even 18 at the time, when she was out mowing the lawn. He'd just sit there on his porch swing, staring, a weird, unsettling intensity in his gaze that made my skin crawl. Lily would come inside, her face pale, and tell me how creepy it felt. I hated that he made her feel unsafe in our own yard. The worst incident, the one that truly made me feel like something had to break, happened one brisk spring afternoon. Lily and I were out shoveling some late-season snow from our porch steps and the walkway. Suddenly, Mr. Henderson burst from his front door, his face a terrifying shade of purple. He didn't just yell. He charged, barreling across our yard like a runaway freight train, his arms pumping, his fists clenched. He was screaming profanities, something about us shoveling too aggressively near his property line, a line that was clearly yards away. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a verbal threat anymore. He clearly intended to get physical. I, a scrawny 20-year-old, instinctively stepped in front of Lily, held up my own fists, and yelled back at him, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fear twisting in my gut. I told him straight up, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm, that I would drop him if he took another step. He actually hesitated, his momentum breaking, his 70-something-year-old body huffing and puffing, steam rising from his angry face. My parents, alerted by the commotion, came rushing out and immediately called the police. But like every other time we tried to get help, nothing really came of it. The police took a report, told him to stay on his side of the property, but there were no arrests, no restraining orders. Just a warning that meant absolutely nothing to a man like Mr. Henderson. He continued to glare, to harass, to make our home feel less like a sanctuary and more like a battleground. I was utterly dissatisfied with how things were, with the constant threat he posed, and I felt utterly powerless to stop him. After that incident with the police, Mr. Henderson didn't physically charge us again, but his other forms of harassment continued, relentless and grinding. He'd make sure to rev his ancient lawnmower at 7 in the morning on weekends, directly beneath our bedroom windows. He'd park his beat-up pickup truck right on the edge of his property, just inches from our driveway, making it almost impossible to back out without doing a 3-point turn. Every time Lily or I were outside, he'd be there, on his porch, watching us with that unnerving stare. It felt like we were living under a microscope, our every move scrutinized by this hateful old man. We tried everything we could think of. My dad installed security cameras, but Mr. Henderson would just wave at them mockingly. My mom wrote letters to the homeowners association, but they claimed it was a civil dispute and wouldn't get involved. We even considered moving, but we loved our house, and why should we be forced out by a bully? We started spending less time in our own yard, avoiding eye contact, keeping our heads down, but it didn't help. Each failed attempt to make him stop, each time he got away with his petty cruelty, made me feel more helpless, more trapped. The original problem of his annoying behavior started to grow bigger and more serious, morphing into a constant source of stress that hung over our entire family. Then, about a year after the charging incident, something else happened. Something that didn't directly involve us but cast a long, dark shadow over the entire neighborhood and cemented just how truly awful Mr. Henderson was. The police were at his house, not just for a complaint, but with multiple squad cars and an ambulance. We heard shouts, a woman's cries. It turned out he had severely abused his wife, a quiet, timid woman we rarely saw outside. He was arrested, charged, and eventually spent time in prison. When we heard the news, a strange mix of relief and sickness washed over me. Relief that he was gone, at least for a while, but sickness knowing what his poor wife must have endured and how close that violence had come to us, to Lily. While he was locked away, a temporary peace settled over Willow Creek. Our street felt lighter, safer. We could actually enjoy our yard. Lily could mow the lawn without feeling watched. But that peace was fragile. I knew he wouldn't be in prison forever. And when he got out, he'd be even angrier, even more vengeful. The thought of him returning, untouched by any real consequence for his actions against us, for the years of terror he had inflicted, gnawed at me. I felt a burning desire for him to pay, not with jail time that he'd eventually serve and return from, but with something personal, something that would hit him where it hurt, in a way he wouldn't see coming. It was my lowest point, seeing him go to prison for something so awful, yet knowing that our personal torment had never truly been addressed, that our suffering at his hands was still unavenged. I knew then that I had to take matters into my own hands, that I had to find a way to make him truly, deeply miserable, even if it was in my own small, secret way. The day Mr. Henderson returned to Willow Creek was quiet, unassuming. His old pickup truck pulled into his driveway, and he lumbered out, looking older, thinner, but still with that same sour expression. The peace of the past months shattered, replaced by a tense anticipation. I knew I couldn't call the police again. I knew he was immune to warnings. My revenge had to be something entirely different, something he would never trace back to me, something that would chip away at his composure day after day. That's when the idea clicked, an old memory of my dad grumbling about persistent salespeople. Mr. Henderson hated anything to do with religion. He'd occasionally yell at people trying to hand out flyers on the street corner. He even had a no solicitors sign that was practically etched into his front door. And I remembered the one group he seemed to absolutely despise, the Jehovah's Witnesses. They were relentless, polite, but persistent. I knew what I had to do. I found their local contact number online and formulated my plan. I would wait a few days, let him settle back in, let his guards down a little. Then, on a Tuesday morning, when I knew my parents would be at work and Lily at school, I made the first call. My heart was pounding, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I spoke in a quiet voice, disguising it a little, explaining that my elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson at Zeiss Street, was deeply interested in learning more about their faith, that he often talked about spiritual matters, and was frequently home on weekday mornings. I stressed his enthusiasm, making it sound like he was practically begging for a visit. I hung up, my hand shaking, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips. A few days later, a clean-cut man and woman in nice clothes appeared on his doorstep. I watched from my bedroom window, barely daring to breathe. Mr. Henderson answered the door, his face a mask of annoyance. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw his arms flail, his head shake emphatically, his expression growing redder by the second. They persisted for a few minutes, polite but unyielding, until he slammed the door in their faces. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated glee. It was so subtle, so untraceable, yet so deeply satisfying. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was my new project. Every few weeks, I would find a different number or a different email address, always giving his address, always emphasizing his supposed keen interest. Sometimes I'd call from a payphone at the grocery store, just to be extra careful. I became a master of subtle observation. I'd see him answer the door to different pairs of Jehovah's Witnesses, his face a kaleidoscope of rising fury, his shouts echoing faintly across the lawn as he angrily told them to leave. I saw his frustration grow, his once impenetrable demeanor cracking under the constant, polite assault on his precious peace. He'd occasionally yell at the street, as if he knew someone was behind it but couldn't prove it. The poetic justice was exquisite. He, who had robbed us of our peace, who had encroached on our property and our sense of safety, was now constantly having his own peace invaded, his own boundaries crossed, by people he abhorred, and he was completely helpless to stop it. This wasn't about violence or public humiliation. It was about a relentless, quiet chipping away at his self-importance, a constant, irritating reminder that he wasn't as in control as he thought he was. Years passed. I went off to community college, then eventually moved to another town for a new job. Lily grew up, went to college herself. Our family eventually sold the house in Willow Creek. But even after I left, even after the house was gone, I kept Mr. Henderson's address tucked away. Every now and then, when the memory of his bullying would resurface, or when I just felt like evening the score a little more, I would make another anonymous call or send another email. It became a little ritual, a small, secret act of continued defiance. Eventually, after I had been living in my new town for a few years, I confessed to my parents about my quiet campaign against Mr. Henderson. I braced myself for a lecture, or at least a look of disapproval. Instead, after a moment of stunned silence, my mom burst out laughing, a hearty, unrestrained sound that made her eyes water. My dad, after his initial shock, joined in, shaking his head with a grin. They both thought it was brilliant, a perfectly harmless yet utterly infuriating revenge that he completely deserved. It felt good to finally share the secret, to have them understand the quiet satisfaction I had felt all those years. It wasn't just about making him angry. It was about regaining a sense of power, about finding a way to fight back when all conventional methods had failed. My new normal was far away from Willow Creek, Ohio, and far away from Mr. Henderson's hateful glares. But sometimes, when I was back visiting my parents or when I drove through my old neighborhood, I'd drive by his old house. I'd never see him, but I'd always wonder. I'd wonder if the Jehovah's Witnesses were still visiting, if he still answered the door with that same look of impotent rage. And sometimes, just sometimes, I'd imagine making one more call, just to keep him on his toes. Because some lessons, like some visits, are best repeated over and over again until they truly sink in. And perhaps, even now, in that quiet corner of Willow Creek, Ohio, an elderly, perpetually grumpy man still occasionally finds himself opening his door to a pair of polite, persistent visitors, a ghost of a past grievance lingering in the air, a whisper of revenge that never truly fades away.